you can count on. This is an Erie News Now election update.
We are taking a live look at Philadelphia right now, where the ballots are being counted frivolously on this Friday afternoon as the final mail-in and absentee ballots are counted in the state of Pennsylvania, one of 4 swing states that have not yet been called for the presidency. Any one of those 4 states could incite a major announcement here on this Friday evening as we come to you live here on Erie News Now. Before we get to our guest, Jeff Bloodsworth, today, and myself with the election updates, let's update you with the numbers here. We start with the race for the president in the popular vote. You can see 94% of the vote is in, and it's Democratic nominee Joe Biden with 73, nearly 74 million votes right now to Donald Trump's 69.8 million. That's a 3-point margin for the former vice president. In the overall popular vote, there you see the popular vote there again. Let's go ahead and see if we can go to the Electoral College here in just 1 second. We see that right now, the Electoral College, you see 264 votes right now for Joe Biden. He is on the cusp of 270. The president has 214 electoral votes. He is currently needing a sweep of the rest of the board to retain his presidency for 4 more years. Here's the race where we stand in Pennsylvania. Joe Biden took the lead in Pennsylvania at about 8 o'clock this morning. You can see right now he remains in the lead in that state. He currently has about a 14,000 vote lead in Pennsylvania over Donald Trump, 50 to 49%. It remains razor thin with 97% of the vote counted. Here's where things stand in Erie County. You see Joe Biden's lead over Donald Trump has grown by a couple of hundred votes. Right now, Joe Biden's lead about 1,400 votes in Erie County. It was 1,300 a little bit earlier today. So Biden right now winning the state of Pennsylvania, and he's winning Erie County as we continue through this Friday. Now the time for the swing states, shall we? We start with Alaska. Again, we've been talking how this isn't really a swing state, but it still has not been called. Right now, Donald Trump is in the lead for those 3 electoral votes. He has 118,000 votes compared to Joe Biden's 63,000, nearly 64,000 votes on this Friday. Moving to Arizona, we mentioned again, the Associated Press has called Arizona, but we continue to monitor it because we know the race is close. Right now, Joe Biden does have a lead of about 41,000 votes. Check that 39,000 votes in the state of Arizona. 95% reporting 1.564 million for Biden, 1.525 million for Donald Trump. Moving on to Georgia. This was a race that also flipped early this morning. Joe Biden is in the lead. He has 2,450,000 votes. Donald Trump, 2,448,000 votes. A difference of just about 1,700 votes for the former vice president, but it is a lead regardless, as he did overtake Donald Trump earlier in the day. Moving on to Nevada, we are getting some new updated information. As you can see, the lead for Biden was about 12,000 votes yesterday. Today, it's up to 21,000, a 50 to 48% advantage for the former vice president, 627,000 to 606,000 votes for Joe Biden. Finally, today, North Carolina also coming in with some new numbers. It's about an 80,000 vote lead for Donald Trump right now. He has 2.73 million votes. Joe Biden at 2.65 million votes. A slim margin, but the president does seem to be winning that right now. Let's move on to the local races. We did have just about an hour ago a projection of the PA Attorney General. You can see Josh Shapiro, the incumbent Democrat, is the projected winner in that race. He'll defeat Republican challenger Heather Heidelbaugh. Right now, Shapiro has 3,321,000 votes. Heidelbaugh just behind that mark with 3,078,000 votes. So a very tight race, as we've been reporting, with 94% of the vote reported. But Shapiro looks like he'll be holding on. We are projecting him the winner. He will win another term as the incumbent at the Attorney General position. We also have a race to call in the Auditor General. Timothy DeFore, the Republican, will defeat Democratic challenger Nina Ahmad, 50 to 46%. 3.2 million votes for DeFore. Ahmad just a little bit over 3 million votes for her, but it's DeFore, the Republican, who picks up the spot in the Auditor General. We can predict and project that race. One race we have not projected yet is the race for Pennsylvania Treasurer. Look at how close it is. Right now, it's Stacey Garrity, the Republican, leading incumbent Democrat Joe Torsello with 6% of the vote left to go. Right now, the lead is about 105,000 votes for Garrity. She has 3.2 million votes to 3.107 votes for Joe Torsello. Let's continue along with our numbers here. These are results that we did project earlier. You can see in the battle for House District 15, it is Glenn Thompson, the Republican. He'll take the victory over Robert Williams, the Democrat, 250,000 to 89,000 votes. Moving along now to the Senate races. In the race for state Senate, we did project this yesterday, but we do have some updated numbers. Mike Kelly over Christy Ganebis, Republican incumbent with 205,000 votes, 139,000 for Ganebis. Moving on, we quickly move as quickly as we can here. Scott Hutchinson in the battle for state Senate defeats Shelby Strohmeyer, 71 to 29%. Another win for Republicans is Dan Laughlin. He takes down Julie Slomski with 98% of the vote, reporting 68,000 votes to 46,000 votes. Moving along now, we have not called the race yet for the State House District 3. You can see Ryan Bizzarro does hold about an 8,000 vote lead over Greg Hayes, the Republican challenger. You do remember Ryan Bizzarro yesterday said on social media that he had won the race, but we have not projected that yet. Bizzarro, though, does have a lead, about 8,000 votes right now. Moving along, our final race that we can call here in the State House is for Brad Rowe, the Republican. Matt Ferretz, the Democratic challenger, could not defeat the Republican. 20,000 votes to 11,000 votes for Brad Rowe. As we were talking, we have new numbers out of Pennsylvania right now. Let's go to them right now. Joe Biden, you can see his lead has increased a little bit. It's now a 14,000 vote lead for the Democrat. He has 3,312,000 votes to Donald Trump's 3,298,000 votes. So not a big increase for Biden, just a few hundred votes. But it is a few hundred regardless as he continues to add, slowly albeit, to his lead right now overall in what we see as the Electoral College in the critical state of Pennsylvania. Here's the map of the Electoral College as we see it right now. Right now, Joe Biden is very close. He has 264 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 214 electoral votes. And all but one of the states you see on the map right now, he is ahead. Right now, Biden is ahead in the state of Pennsylvania, the state of Georgia, and the state of Nevada. The only two states in which the president leads is North Carolina and Alaska. So right now, Joe Biden has three potential paths to 270. He needs just one more state to clinch the presidency. We have been on this number for a very long time, but we are possibly waiting for a call to be made of one of those three states today. Pennsylvania, the most likely. Georgia also could be an outside possibility, but we aren't ruling that out yet. And with that, we bring in Jeff Bloodsworth. He has been our political expert from Gannon University for the last couple of days. Jeff, I hope you got some sleep in the bed that we made behind for you. Let's go ahead and break this down. Yesterday, when we were talking, you were telling us that you thought Joe Biden had enough votes out there to be able to overtake Donald Trump in Pennsylvania and Georgia specifically. That has happened. So the question now becomes, the first question is there any way that Donald Trump can make up the votes in either Pennsylvania or Georgia to come back? Because we know he needs both of those states to keep alive for the presidency.
First, you look at Georgia, which is like the former vice president's lead is what, 1,500 votes?
Yeah.
Which is,
let's take a look at it right now.
Razor thin out of what, nearly 5 million cast. I mean,
right.
that it is an extraordinarily close. But this is what we know about kind of recounts and challenges to ballots. That at best, in any recount, you might get dozens, sometimes scores. Every once in a while, you might get into the low hundreds of ballots kind of being changed or maybe being cast out. Even in Georgia, once all the ballots come in, right, because there's still some military ballots out, but even a 1,500 ballot lead, just historically speaking, is relatively safe. Now, that sounds kind of counterintuitive because it's so incredibly close, but the computer systems and the election officials who count these ballots, it is remarkably accurate. So Georgia, that is the only place where you see like a real possibility of kind of the former vice president's lead being overturned. I think there's about 125,000 ballots left
right.
in Pennsylvania. those are moving 75% at least in favor of the vice president. The Pennsylvania is going to be very close, but it's going to be a significant lead, and surely, by all historical standards, the kind of lead that's not going to be overturned by a recount or challenges to ballots in the courts.
Let's take a look at Pennsylvania. A lot of people would say, people like yourself, election experts, could make the argument, well, Biden's overtaken in Pennsylvania. He has this race won. But we're learning more information today that there's a possible challenge coming from the Trump campaign, a potential challenge of votes, specifically mail-in ballots that were received after Election Day. If you remember, the Pennsylvania court made a ruling, and that ruling was that any ballot that was postmarked by Election Day could be counted as long as it was received by 5 p.m. this afternoon. The Trump campaign is planning on challenging that. We're also hearing that there's a potential that there are 100,000 provisional ballots in the state of Pennsylvania that seem to skew for the president. So what do you make of that, Jeff? I mean, what exactly do people need to know when we hear those two pieces of information?
Well, you can have all the court challenges that you want, but the courts have consistently ruled in favor of counting those ballots and allowing them to be counted. Provisional ballots, look, I mean, provisional ballots are spotty, right? I mean, what they're going to require is a lot of scrutiny. There's a reason why they are provisional ballots. And so 100,000 is a big number. They should all be counted. But historically, when you have a big batch of provisional ballots, the chances are that a significant number are not going to be cast because there were issues with that particular voter, and 100,000 is a lot. They're going to receive a lot of scrutiny, but if you're kind of casting your hopes upon those provisional ballots, that's a pretty thin read.
We're now hearing there's about 112,000 right now. 112,000 mail-in ballots left in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So that number is a little bit smaller. You look at the numbers here, Jeff, you see the numbers slowly trickling in. So right now, Joe Biden with a lead of just over 14,000 votes right now. You see the president close to 3.3 million. Biden has surpassed that. So, Jeff, a lot of people are asking, both online and to me actually in person today before we came in the door, we were asked, are they going to call the race? When are they going to call the race? Is the race going to be called tonight? Is there a likelihood that we see a race get called tonight? Knowing what we know, of course, we saw early in the morning, Joe Biden took the lead in Pennsylvania, but the networks and the AP, which we go by, have been slow to call it. Question one is why. Question two is, do you think we could see something tonight?
This election, it does remind me of 1976. I mean, the Ford-Carter race, interestingly enough, where Carter was way ahead and Ford closed the gap, similar, right, in that regard. And it was interesting because the race was called relatively early, right, and you didn't have the mail-in ballots, of course. But I think we live in a different political context, and I do think that the president's charges thus far without any basis have made kind of election officials and networks understandably reticent to call an election. This is razor thin. We've seen this before where you have several states. This is less than 100,000 votes. This is less than 75,000 votes that are separating a series of states. So I think that there is some political tensions, a lot of kind of raw partisan feelings, which is making networks nervous on calling an election. I suspect Pennsylvania might call the election tonight. The vice president is giving an address, I believe, at 8 p.m. tonight.
We don't know a time yet. We do know the vice president will be giving an address, and they said prime time. When that means, is it 8, 10, midnight? We don't know.
I would suspect that they know something. If the vice president is going to give a primetime address, he's spoken in the last few days. Very brief, didn't say a lot, count the votes, all very responsible. Primetime address, I get a feeling that they probably know something. And he's not going to get out ahead of this and declare victory until there are kind of other institutions that are going to kind of buttress that claim. I think he's trying to be different from the president.
Again, interesting right now as we continue along to look at this race. So again, you're saying that it's possible that the Biden campaign has scheduled this announcement because they believe that when they make the announcement, the race might be called?
I would imagine. I mean, look, it's the end of the week. It's before the weekend. It probably surely has to say something. My hunch would be that either they have a strong sense that, look, if Pennsylvania officials are telling the Trump and Biden campaign that we're going to have 99 point whatever of these ballots counted, and they're doing the math, and they see that, that the vice president will have a 1% lead or a 0.75% lead, then you could move towards, you could imagine that the networks might then call Pennsylvania in Biden's column. Biden would come out and declare victory. Although, it could be that he's going to come out and say we're going to continue counting the votes. That's within the realm of possibility. My hunch is you wouldn't schedule a primetime speech without a sense that something is going to change, that there's going to be some movement.
And again, we don't have a live look at the set, but we were looking at it a little bit earlier. This is most likely going to be at the location he gave his first speech on election night, which you would think would be the location to which he would give a victory or a consolation speech or whatever, concession speech. And so we don't know, but again, we do know that prime time tonight, at some point this evening, Joe Biden will be giving a speech, some sort of, we don't know what it'll entail, but we do know he'll be speaking. So that's the former vice president. Seeing he's projecting confidence again, wanting all the votes to be counted. Let's move on to the president. The last 24 hours for the president of the United States has drawn a lot of backlash. Whether or not you support the president, whether or not you don't support the president, it's not what we're talking about here. But we did hear an address from him last night about 6:30. You had just left at that point. And he had talked about the potential for fraud. He believed there was fraud in several states. He thought that, again, he said on Twitter multiple times, if you count the legal ballots, we win. If you count the illegal ballots, we lose. We do want to note that we have not reported. There is no evidence at the moment of any fraud going on in any of the states. But I want to ask you just specifically the president's tone in the last 24 hours. Regardless of what your thought was on the speech, to you, does it sound like somebody who feels like he might be on the verge of losing an election just by the body language and the address last night and his social media this morning? President
Trump is an open book. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of his supporters like about him, is that he's not a typical politician. He doesn't ooze fakeness. And so this sounds to me like somebody who knows they are on the verge not just of a defeat, but my goodness, I mean, this is less than 75,000 votes. I mean, he almost pulled off the greatest upset in presidential history since 1948. I always thought it was too high of a hill to climb, but he almost pulled it off, and that's got to just tear at him. But it sounds to me it's desperation. These are accusations without evidence, and it's telling. I mean, for over 4 years, we've had Republican officials who have been very slow to contradict the president and then candidate Trump. And our own Senator Pat Toomey today was fairly direct in castigating blame on the president. I mean, it is odd at this point, at least to me, to hear Republicans directly contradict the president, and that's what you're hearing.
Now, we've also heard from the Biden campaign that the Biden campaign is actually looking right now to reach out to members of the GOP, members of the Democratic Party, that if the race were to be called, potentially standing with them and, again, just saying that every vote should count. Again, all of this goes into the mess, we'll call it, which will happen after the election. So Jeff, just tell the viewers here, we talked about a little bit last night, that even if a station were to call the race, there's still a lot that has to happen after that. Give us an idea of what needs to happen after that and what, if any, legal challenges would throw curveball, if you will, into that potential mess.
So let's imagine a network or networks call the election. That's not legally binding. And so, look, I mean, these are very close races in a series of states. And by every right, every American should want, the exceptionally close races to have a recount. And even in these close races, to scrutinize, right? You can do things short of recounts in which you scrutinize the ballots and you scrutinize the vote totals.
Right.
Beyond that, then if there are legitimate accusations of corruption, these absolutely should be and will be going to the courts. Thus far, these have been accusations without evidence. But look, you would take those accusations with evidence. You would present them to the court. I would imagine the Republican Party is going to kind of organize these accusations and kind of try to find the best of them,
right,
and then proceed into the courts. But this isn't 2000. This isn't Florida and 527 votes. This is over a series of many different states that all have very different election laws. This is the brilliance of our system,
right,
the Electoral College, right? It's not one system, it's several states, and these are varying vote totals. There's going to be legal wrangling. We know that. It is a almost insurmountable hill to have legal challenges over all of these states, very close races, but in Arizona, let's imagine it's a 30,000 vote margin. Let's imagine that's what it ends up being. That's a lot of ballots. That is a huge number in which you have to try to, disqualify. And so it will look messy. It might take weeks, but it's one of those things in which, what are the chances? What kind of, how valid are these accusations? And thus far, even Republican officials, right, privately, some publicly, are casting an enormous. I mean, in Georgia, if you say that there is corruption, what does that mean for the Republican officials who won? I mean, you have Republicans who won. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have Republicans who won statewide races and local races. If it's corruption, what do they do? You have Republicans who won, and it's in their interest to have this this election, be seen as valid.
Taking a look at the numbers right now for the overall popular vote, you see some votes have come in. Joe Biden's still ahead by roughly 4 million votes right now over Donald Trump as we continue to await the results from the states. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline potentially for tonight. We touched on it a bit earlier. You were talking about, Jeff, just potentially what we could see and the potential for the state of Pennsylvania maybe to get called. But we've seen the ballots come in a bit slower than we expected. Yesterday, Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar said that we could have all the votes counted and tallied by tonight, but we've seen a significant delay. What's leading to that delay, if anything? Is it just a matter of wanting to make sure everything's accurate, or is it something deeper than that?
Well, at this point, look, for instance, what I know in Pittsburgh, where I think this morning there were about 20,000 votes, and what they announced in Allegheny County is that they were taking an administrative day. And from the outside, that looked like, what are you doing? Why aren't you counting the ballots? But what that actually meant is we're scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point.
Yeah.
And provisional ballots, right, and ballots that have been put to the side, these take an enormous amount of scrutiny and time. You're going through every single one of these. And even mail-in ballots, you have to make sure that it was done correctly. This takes an enormous amount of time. It is. We knew this was going to happen. It's the shame on the state legislature that they didn't allow for these mail-in ballots to be counted early. All Pennsylvanians and America is being put through this kind of grueling process because the states had every knowledge that that this was could be the reality, and it just takes a lot of time to go through provisional ballots and mail-in ballots. And what we're doing at this point is they're going through kind of the most difficult of these ballots to kind of scrutinize. And it's just going to take it always takes more time than you think it will.
Now explain why these ballots in particular are the most difficult to scrutinize as compared to a general election day in-person vote.
Well, if you have a provisional ballot, what you have is somebody who maybe showed up to the wrong precinct, or somebody who had a mail-in ballot. I mean, I know I had students, several of them, who were like, my parents threw away my mail-in ballot. What do I do? And it was like, well, go to the precinct on campus at Gannon, cast a provisional ballot. And what you have to do with that provisional ballot is then you have to find out, well, where did that mail-in ballot go? go. Every Pennsylvania voter has a voter ID number. You can look it up. Did they cast a mail-in ballot? Are there two different ballots out there? I mean, this is good to know that there are ways to make sure that people are not casting multiple ballots. The president had made that charge. In Pennsylvania and all states, we have a way of figuring out whether that happened or not. So, long story short, there are any number of reasons that someone had to cast a provisional ballot. And so we have to make sure that ballot is a legitimate ballot. Mail-in ballots, every single one, it's a process. You have to take it out of the envelope. You have to make sure that it was signed correctly and that the signatures match. This just takes an enormous amount of time. And look, this is, we've heard this again and again. This is democracy at work. It is deliberate, it is slow, but it is democracy at work.
And it's still taking a bit of time, but again, it seems to be working. Explain to the viewer what a provisional ballot is and the process of what it takes to get through and certify a provisional ballot.
So, provisional ballot, I've registered to vote. I have a precinct. I show up at the correct precinct. I don't have a mail-in ballot. And so if you show up at the wrong precinct or you show up at the precinct and you didn't bring in your mail-in ballot, because what I did is I had a mail-in ballot. I was a little nervous. I brought it in. I made sure that it was decertified. They had to put it in a special envelope. I mean, you have to do it in that way. But if there's any sort of inconsistency, and what we know, like a lot of young people, right, and a lot of poorer people, they move around a lot. They don't have a lot of, they're not staying necessarily in the same neighborhood, in the same precinct. And so there are tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians who, I moved and they go back to their old precinct. And then they find out that they can't cast a regular ballot and they have to cast a provisional ballot. And there just needs to be a lot of due diligence just to make sure, is that a proper legal vote, as the president has been saying? And what we do know is that, election officials, these are professionals. And they go through these ballots. I mean, all the studies about voter fraud have revealed that is, voting fraud is basically, statistically, it doesn't happen. The very, very few numbers of times that it happens makes it statistically insignificant. What it reveals is that our voting professionals, the people who oversee our elections, Republicans and Democrats, they're really good at their job.
Sure.
We should have a lot of trust that the vote that is reported is the actual vote.
So we've heard some news over the last couple of hours in Pennsylvania that York County had confused some mail-in ballots with provisional ballots. I want to ask you first, how does it happen? Is it just a mix-up? And number two, what's the process of making sure that you have your mail-in ballots and then your provisional ballots? Because from what we know, we were told at least that those were to be segregated. So what's the process with that if you confuse some mail-in with provisional? How would that happen?
Well, I wasn't there, but I would imagine it's probably fairly easy to do. And that you have, it's mayhem. There's a lot of extra people who have come in to help kind of count the votes. And you have all these mail-in ballots, and so you have a room in which it's secured. You have the cameras, you have the election observers, and you're trying to, put your stack of mail-in ballots here, and oh my gosh, we have provisional ballots over here. And all the kind of hubbub, one could imagine it's a relatively easy thing to do to move one stack from here to over there. And what is heartening is that the fact is that they realized it. They were able to catch that mistake. But even if you do mix the provisional with the mail-ins, I mean, these ballots are getting scrutiny. And so we should have an enormous amount of faith. All the studies show, all of them, right, about corruption and kind of ballot counting, is that mistakes in counting votes are so extraordinarily rare. This is how we know this, is because when we have races that are close and you have recounts, the numbers of votes that are changed are incredibly small. Right. It's so rare to have the initial result be overturned, even when you have a difference of a few hundred votes.
And we saw that in 2000 with Bush v. Gore. I'm not exactly sure the correct number, but I believe it was somewhere in the 600 range when we got down to the first count in Florida. There was a recount, of course, and I think the number may be shrunk by 200. So it's important for the people to know, even if there were to be a recount, it's very unlikely that there's going to be a significant sway in the vote. Let's take, for example, Wisconsin. Wisconsin about a 20,000 vote lead right now for Vice President Biden. Unlikely that there'd be 20,000 votes there unless there was a court ruling that would exclude some. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I mean, you have a lot of scrutiny about what ballots you can count and what ballots you can't. I mean, what happened in Florida, right, the infamous hanging chads where you had to kind of use the push pin, and there are a lot of ballots that were never counted in Florida because they were disqualified from the very start.
Right.
And so once you have a count, you can be relatively confident that the ballots that were counted that's going to be the pool of ballots that are going to be counted to give you the final result. In a case like Georgia could be a case. Maybe there's a cache of some ballots that were disqualified. You can have a court ruling and a challenge, and they could say, no, we're going to bring those in. 1,500 vote lead. You could imagine something happening in Georgia and that flipping back to the president. But over a series of states, even at what are incredibly small margins, you can't imagine it, especially in Pennsylvania, because the margin in Pennsylvania, I'm confident that the margin in Pennsylvania is going to be the largest margin of all of these close states. And then at that point, I mean, if you're talking 50 or 70,000 votes, that's a steep, heavy climb.
And you would say the margin the largest, number one, because Pennsylvania is this one state remaining outstanding that has the most votes to be counted.
Yeah, and my understanding is these are mail-in ballots. Some are provisional, right? But a lot of them are still mail-in ballots. They're breaking, even ballots from Republican areas are breaking 75 to 80% in favor of the former vice president. So the former vice president's vote is going to continue to climb. Anyone who was kind of observing this even a couple of days ago, we understood. I mean, I'm not surprised that the former vice president kind of has taken the lead in Pennsylvania. Former Governor Ed Rendell said it as much on election night. So this is not surprising, although it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people have been contacting me, friends and family, going, are you sure the former vice president will take the lead in Pennsylvania? We're not used to ballots coming in such high margins for one candidate or the other. It's because the president asked his supporters not to do the mail-in ballots. I mean, that's why the margins are so skewed. In Arizona, we're seeing a very different kind of result, in that Republicans dropped off their mail-in ballots on the day of the election, and so some of the mail-in ballots in Phoenix are skewing towards the president. So that's its own kind of unique situation. But I mean, through the night, I totally expect, and I'm sure the former vice president's staff, they have a number that they have in mind of what they're going to reach.
And again, it's important to note, as Jeff was talking about, and a lot of people have asked myself this question too, is it was to be understood that Donald Trump would most likely have a big lead on election night in states such as Pennsylvania. Georgia, of course, is one of them too. Any state that was contested, there was going to be a lead. But of course, now Joe Biden making up those numbers. And like you said, Jeff, I'm looking right now, we're looking at these counties, especially the rural counties that are Trump territory. There'd be some people that would say potentially that, as we look at the precincts reporting, well, there's still some vote to come in Republican counties. But like you've mentioned, you believe that, from your understanding, the majority of those ballots, even the ones in heavily Republican counties, are going to come for Joe Biden.
I mean, those are surely mostly mail-in votes. You can be sure the former vice president, absolutely, right, his campaign team, they know the numbers of every county and every ballot that is kind of waiting to be counted, and whether it's mail-in or not. They understand that these mail-in ballots, even in, what is a mail-in ballot? What's the number of mail-ins versus provisional? I fully expect, based on my understanding, that the remaining vote is going to be coming in, as it has for the last 2 days, heavily for the former vice president. Arizona and Phoenix is a slightly different case, but again, the vote counts in Maricopa County for those mail-in ballots have skewed towards the president, but my understanding is that they're not at a high enough level to erase the former vice president's lead, even in Arizona.
All right, let's play what if for just a second. We know the stations, there hasn't been a single outlet that's called the race so far. And the question has been all day, when is the race going to get called? When do we know? When would it happen? Yada, yada, yada. In a state like Pennsylvania or Georgia, how much of a lead would one candidate have to have at this point in order for the race to be called? Let's go state by state, starting in Pennsylvania. Right now it's about a 15,000 vote lead for Biden. Let's check. Yeah, 15,000 vote lead, about 118,000 votes left to go. At what point would the station be able to say, we're confident we can call this?
I think if you have, how many are outstanding?
About 118,000.
I think if you have a 15,000 vote lead and 118 outstanding, I don't think you can make the call at that point. I think what you would want is to have the vote, your lead to be at least equal to the number of outstanding ballots. You want to have some sort of kind of balance in there, because I can understand if I were the president, I'd be like, well, how can you call it when I could potentially make this up? That seems reasonable to me. I would imagine if the former vice president had a 1% lead, right, a full 1% lead,
sure.
In the next couple of hours, one could go out and kind of make that statement. And I think the partisan makeup of the state leadership matters. And Georgia, it's too close.
Right.
I mean, that would be totally...
Let's go to Georgia for just a second here. Here is Georgia right now, and you see it's about 1,600 votes.
No one should kind of call the election when it's a 1,600 vote margin. But what I think does matter is the fact Pennsylvania, you have a Democratic governor. Georgia, you have a Republican governor who's quite close to President Trump. To his credit, and the Republican Secretary of State's credit, I mean, they have been, I think, remarkably kind of nonpartisan, at least publicly, in sort of their statements on the vote count, because they're getting pressure from the White House.
Sure.
But that's incredibly close. I mean, that is in Georgia. They don't have a vote total that spurs a recount, but there's going to be a recount, and no one should really say anything until there's a recount in Georgia.
So you don't think Georgia will be called at all until a recount comes?
Oh, I think Georgia's at least a week away.
Wow. And so as we look at the other states are fairly similar. Again, joining me is Jeff Bloodsworth. He is Gannon University's political expert, economic too, but expert in all areas. Let's look at the states that have kind of been on the back burner, shall we? North Carolina and Nevada specifically. We know North Carolina may not report votes for another week or so. Why hasn't North Carolina been called? Republicans making the argument North Carolina insurmountable, give it to the president. Why haven't we seen a call in North Carolina? It's the same thing?
No, it's curious. I'm imagining elections officials, they must know something. It seems highly unlikely that the former vice president would catch the president in North Carolina. But one would imagine that it's a lot of mail-in votes. Maybe they're provisional ballots in Democratic areas. It could be they do have a Democratic governor in North Carolina. Maybe there's pressure to not call the state. There could be some partisan kind of pressure. At the same time, I always, when the obvious doesn't happen, meaning, well, he's ahead, why don't they call it? I imagine there's at least some sort of statistical possibility and also some events on the ground that have stopped officials from calling it North Carolina. I don't think the former vice president will catch the president, but something's going on behind the scenes that's lending some credibility that it is somehow perhaps plausible for the former vice president to win in North Carolina.
Nevada, 21,000 vote lead. Biden's got that at the moment. He has actually increased his lead by about 15,000 votes since yesterday. What's the deal with Nevada?
Well, there's just too many votes that are outstanding. I mean, if you're Joe Biden, I think essentially you've kind of colored that in on your own personal map, dark blue. Those votes are all in Vegas. It's a Democratic stronghold. I mean, it was 8,000 vote lead this morning. It's 21. That's just going to continue. I'm sure that the president's team has kind of they're not focusing on Nevada. The Vegas vote is what the Vegas vote is, and it's they have a strong kind of old school union political machine that kind of churns out the vote, and so Nevada is surely going towards Joe Biden. They just need to get more. They have too many outstanding votes, and they've been a lot slower than the other states. My understanding is Saturday they're going to finally kind of get through the lion's share of those votes, and I imagine Nevada will be called on Saturday.
Interestingly enough, when we heard that yesterday, that Nevada was going to be announcing their votes on Saturday, we all were sitting here, at least I was sitting here and thinking, by then the race will be over. We don't know yet. We still haven't gotten a call, and it's 4:30 on Friday afternoon, so it's not out of the question that Nevada could be the one that calls the race if Pennsylvania or Georgia doesn't get called. And so, again, we continue to look at the Electoral College map here. We're going to get in just a second to some news coming from the Pennsylvania GOP right here in our area that we're learning. But I want to go just back really quickly here, Jeff, to the Electoral College map and just confirm a couple of things. So you look at the map right now, and you see that there are 4 states. Alaska we can put in most likely the Trump category. Just to confirm, if you're the president, you only have one path to 270. You have to win every remaining state.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, President Trump has to win. He has to win Georgia. He has to win Pennsylvania. It's not enough. Let's imagine he wins Nevada. That wouldn't do him a whole heck of a lot of good. But he cannot afford to lose Pennsylvania and Georgia.
Sure. And again, for the former vice president, really, you look at this map, you only need one more state.
Yes. Again, we're assuming that Arizona is in his column according to the AP.
Yep.
If we take that assumption. And I'm going to defer to the Associated Press.
Sure.
I think, and Fox News, I think that they know something. It's probably a little bit closer than what they thought it was going to be. And so, Nevada would put the former vice president over the top.
Joining me is Jeff Bloodsworth, Gannon University. He's been with us for the last few days breaking down this election as we're here on Friday. We don't think we're going to have him on Saturday. I don't know if I'll be here yet either. We don't know if the race is going to be called. We just don't know, right? That's the deal right now. Let's go ahead and talk about the news coming out of Pennsylvania. We have heard in the last hour or so that the Pennsylvania GOP, Pennsylvania Republicans, have asked the Supreme Court to suspend the order the segregation of ballots received after Election Day. So we've been hearing that right now the mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, seemingly not segregated. Does that do any good? What does that mean? Why would the Pennsylvania GOP be doing that?
I would imagine maybe they're trying to establish some claims, right, that one could then use in a court of law to challenge certain ballots. Look, it's so incredibly close. You can totally understand any political party, when it's so close, you're going to try to kind of make every legal maneuver you possibly can. But the courts had ruled on my understanding on this quite consistently.
Correct.
And it's a last-ditch effort that one can't imagine that it's going to work. And let's imagine a world in which it does. Joe Biden is ahead in Arizona and Nevada and in Georgia. I mean, even if you do get, this is a Hail Mary.
Sure.
Even if you do connect on this Hail Mary, you have to get another series of Hail Marys. I understand that the election is still not over. We shouldn't call it until the votes are counted. But it is a extraordinarily steep hill for the president to climb.
So my next question then to you, if we're hearing this news, GOP is asking the segregation of ballots, does that then lead, in your mind, to a potential lawsuit that the Trump campaign might file to say the court ruling that you can get ballots up to 3 days after Election Day is wrong? Do you see that being step one on the lily pad to another potential lawsuit? Because if you remember, the Supreme Court originally said that they wouldn't hear that case. Again, the Trump campaign brought it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, we're not going to hear that right now. Could that be the next step?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure there are a series of different steps in which they're trying to get, ballots disqualified. So that's probably one of several maneuvers they're going to be kind of enjoining. It's not going to be the only one. I'm imagining From now until early January, there are going to be cases filed again and again and again. And again, my understanding, kind of reading what different kind of legal experts have said, you know, there are a lot of people who are thinking, oh, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. The conservatives control the Supreme Court. And it's like, before you get to the Supreme Court, you have to have kind of, you know, a legal basis upon which to kind of move these through the state courts.
Sure.
This isn't Florida in 2000. You know, the margins are not incredibly small in that way. Anything could happen, but I just, the courts rightfully so have been quite hesitant to enter into what was famously in a Supreme Court case, they called it the political thicket, right, trying to kind of separate the courts from entering into electoral politics. And I'm imagining that the courts are going to continue to give a wide amount of deference to elected officials in state legislatures and to not, after the fact, kind of enter into that political thicket and influence, you know, the number of ballots and take ballots that have been counted and disqualify them, and then overturn what many people will see as the legitimate result of the election.
Again, right now, not guaranteeing anything, but Pennsylvania still, from what we know right now, is the deciding factor in the election. Georgia has not been called. Nevada has not been called. North Carolina has not been called. So Pennsylvania, right now, assuming Joe Biden, you know, even if he's won Arizona, Pennsylvania would be the state that would put him over the top. So a lot of questions there. Let's move on. We were talking a little bit earlier here with Jeff Bloodsworth at Gannon University. We were talking a bit earlier about the former vice president potentially making a statement tonight. We've confirmed that. We know it's going to happen at some point. We don't know when. We don't know if it's going to be, if he's officially, by channels' perspective, won the presidency. I want to ask, what's the likelihood the president makes a statement tonight? So we haven't heard anything. His conference last night was announced about an hour beforehand. Do we see the president make a statement tonight?
Look, the past is prologue, right? To you know, and if you've been in, look, most every American who follows current events and politics has become a mini expert on President Trump. I can't imagine a world in which Joe Biden gives kind of a national address in which President Trump doesn't feel the need to reply. Is it going to be Friday night? I don't know. Is it going to? It will happen over the weekend. I think you can be sure. It's hard to know. It feels to me there's a lot of shooting from the hip that's going on at the White House. Not a lot of sort of kind of public pronouncements that are jibing with legal strategies. I can't imagine that President Trump wouldn't reply to former Vice President Biden, but I think it also depends on what the former Vice President says. If it's been what he said over the last few days, which is, you know, hey, we're counting the votes, we're being patient.
A minute and a half, 2 minutes,
yeah,
he's off the stage.
That's not what he's going to do tonight. You don't have a primetime address in which you say nothing. I would imagine the president is going to respond. Is it going to be tonight? Look, sometimes the president is impulsive, and he will, you know, do something impulsive. Sometimes in the past, he's listened to the counsel of his advisors, and might wait. Surely a tweet. I think
For sure.
Yeah, I think we can kind of bet a lot of money on that. I'm sure the betting markets give good odds on that. Something is going to happen. We're going to hear something from the White House, and I would imagine something from President Trump, either a speech or a tweet.
And again, the timeline of speeches, we've heard the vice president give speeches on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So every day, again, albeit they've been short, but he is expecting to give one today. The president gave one on Wednesday morning and then yesterday evening. So not as many as the former vice president, but he has been giving speeches nonetheless. Want to give you some new news, some new numbers out of Georgia. Let's take a look at them right now. You see the numbers just updating. It says 100% reporting because we're at about 99.96% reporting. And the numbers have actually shrunk slightly, it looks like, for Joe Biden. 2,450,563. So quick math puts him at 1,544 ahead of Donald Trump. We don't know how many votes are left outstanding right now, but the vote seems to slowly come in, trickles in, almost painstakingly so. As we take a look right now at the state of Georgia, let's go ahead and run through the numbers again one more time in the presidential race. So as we take a look here, the popular vote, almost 74 million votes for Joe Biden, almost 70 million for Donald Trump. And that, Jeff, will be the story. Well, let's bring you in here really quickly again. That'll be another story, too, is the high vote turnout of this election. The fact that Joe Biden and Donald Trump could be number one and number two for the most votes for a presidential candidate in history.
Yeah, look, I think it adds to the pain for Republicans and the president to get so many votes, to come so close. I'm imagining there's a lot of mail-in vote that hasn't been counted in Massachusetts, in California, and some really deep blue places. This is the interesting thing about the polls. They were off, okay? But I'm going to imagine that nationally, I'm imagining, kind of reading between the tea leaves and listening to particular experts, they're imagining Joe Biden emerging with maybe 53% of the vote, which is going to push President Trump down to 47, maybe high 46 points. So something, and so the polls in their national vote kind of estimations will be off by about 2 points, 2 to 3 points, which, by the way, is within the margin of error.
Right.
Polls were massively off in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, among other states. Pollsters just don't know how to poll Donald Trump voters.
And again, you talk about margin of error, you talk about the polls. The polls, again, like we said in 2016, were not the case. But we did expect that Joe Biden would win the popular vote. That was, if you were going to make one election night prediction, that'd probably be the safest bet, besides calling California for the Democrats, Alabama, or so for the Republicans. That would be the safest bet. Joe Biden would win the popular vote. We expected that coming in here. Taking a look at new numbers now out of Pennsylvania. We just got these new numbers. As you can see here, I'm going to actually show you some little snippets, kind of some background information we're getting here. This is what we use to update our information. So anytime one of these numbers comes up in red, that's new info that we have. So you can see Pennsylvania is a new number, and we're going to show that to you right now. Let's take a look at the vote in Pennsylvania. And you can see the vote remains in the high 14,000s for Joe Biden. It's going up or down by tens of votes at this point, but votes still coming in from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the surrounding Philadelphia counties, which again proves good for the vice president, and if you're the president, not numbers that you want to see. All right, moving on to other numbers as well. We showed you Georgia. Let's show you that again. Again, so close. I mean, numbers in the hundreds at this point here right now. And so that's the national race. I also want to show you the updated numbers in the PA treasurer race. So this is a local race. We keep getting numbers in new numbers every single moment here. This is a great race right now. It's very close. You can see Stacey Garrity, the Republican, leading Joe Torcello by about 103,000 votes. So the incumbent Democrat in danger of losing the seat there. Race certainly not over yet. We project about 60% of the votes are in where that race is concerned. So a lot of local races as well. Really, there's only, I'm looking at the map right now, Jeff, two local races. One local race. Two if you count the president for Erie County, but one local race that has not been called yet, at least statewide race. So we obviously have information on that right now. We do also want to make a announcement here on the State House District 3. We are learning that Ryan Bizzarro, and I actually have my producer Alex here. I want to make sure that I have this information correct here. Alex, it looks like on our map that the numbers have been updated and that Ryan Bizzarro has the check mark next to his name over Greg Hayes. I want to make sure that before I say anything, that is the correct information. We have projected that for Bizzarro.
That means an Associated Press call. Let me double check. I'll be right back.
Okay, so the AP, according to that, has called the State House District 3 for Ryan Bizzarro. This is breaking information if we're getting this right now. The only reason I looked at it, it just came across my screen moments ago that there was a W next to Bizzarro's name. And Jeff, as we do a little filibustering here, Bizzarro did claim victory a little bit earlier in the race, which was kind of funny. But it's been a fairly tight race in terms of what the polling numbers have said.
Yeah, look, Mr. Hayes ran a very spirited campaign. Driving around Erie County during the summer and the fall, you saw a lot of signage for Mr. Hayes. You would assumed it was a Democratic seat. What we're seeing in Pennsylvania, right, is that candidates matter. You say you have the incumbent Attorney General Josh Shapiro winning, but then you have further down the ballot incumbent Democrats losing statewide races. Candidates matter. People were not, and that's heartening to me, is that what you don't want to see is such hyperpartisanship that voters don't even care who the candidates are. And so it's heartening to see that there's mixing and matching, and that the quality of the race and whether a candidate speaks to the issues in a particular region actually does have an influence on who votes for them.
Again, we're looking at this race right now. You see the check mark next to Ryan Bizzarro's name. This is just in the last few minutes. That means the AP has called the race for Ryan Bizzarro. We are using AP numbers, but we just want to make sure that is correct. We're not going to say that we're projecting anything until we get those numbers. Our producer Alex is coming back to us, and Alex seems to have a
As of 4:30, yes.
Okay, so we now are predicting, as of 4:30, just a few minutes ago, that in this race for State House District 3, Ryan Bizzarro, the incumbent Democrat, has won re-election over Republican Greg Hayes. You see the numbers there, 21,899 votes for Bizzarro, 13,789 votes for Greg Hayes. So again, that's now developing information for this local race here. Bizzarro will win another term. And again, Jeff, as you were talking, the local elections are important too. We've been talking about the presidential election, again, what's going on here, what's going on there. But we do know that local elections are important too. And like you said, if you drove around Erie, it wasn't just Trump or Biden signs. It were other signs as well. Laughlin, Slomsky, Mike Kelly, Kristi Ganibas, Greg Hayes, Ryan Bizzarro. You could tell the local races in 2020 were important.
I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never seen so much kind of engagement and activism, even during a pandemic. I mean, This exceeded 2008. I thought the Obama campaign, whether you voted for the former president or not, they were brilliant in their kind of organizing and kind of outreach to voters. And what I was kind of what I found remarkable is that even in a global pandemic, that both Republicans and Democrats found ways to contact people via text. I mean, I had so many kind of door hangings left on my door here in the city of Erie. There was an engagement, and not just at the presidential level, on a variety of local races, and it's a healthy thing because there were lots of surprises, races that we thought that would be close that weren't. Yep. There were upsets. People were kind of switching their parties and who they're voting for, on their ballots. It's healthy, it's vigorous. The large turnout, we know this. When you have a huge turnout that exceeds projections, it makes the polls less valuable. And that's what we saw in Erie County.
Again, interesting. Let's run through the local races really quickly, too, because there were wins for both sides on the local races. So let's go ahead and run through them in case you are just joining us and haven't had a chance to really look at these local races. Local and statewide races, I should say. Let's start with the statewide races. Attorney General race, I feel like Josh Shapiro, you can see the incumbent Democrat, is going to win re-election. Josh Shapiro has made just about as many television appearances as he does total votes right now. 3.3 million for Shapiro, 3.081 million for Heather Heidelbos. The Democrats will win that race. You can see the race for the Auditor General. Timothy DeFore picking up a win for the Republicans in the Auditor General. So the hierarchy in Pennsylvania will include at least one Republican, with Governor Tom Wolf still remaining power here. And again, the race for the PA Treasurer remains close. The question I have for you, Jeff, again, local races sometimes can be overshadowed. Would this be a surprise to you if Stacey Garrity were to overtake Joe Torsello, the incumbent Democrat?
No, I mean, I think it would be a moderate surprise. I mean, we expected that this would be a Democratic year. Pennsylvania, in general, is a Democratic state, especially in presidential elections. Famously, Pennsylvania lags behind other states in the number of statewide female officials that are elected. My understanding, Pennsylvania has never elected a female governor. And so to see a woman, right, a Republican, defeat an incumbent Democratic man in a presidential year, I mean, that's a moderate surprise. Candidates matter. I mean, this is what we learn.
Again, goes to show just everything that's possible in 2020. We'll run through the local races again really quickly for you. Glenn Thompson defeating Robert Williams in the battle for House District 15. That was really the first projection we got on our local and national races, so Glenn Thompson wins another term. Also a win for Republicans, Mike Kelly over Christy Ganibas. Ganibas putting up a decent fight there with 139,000 votes, but Kelly will win re-election. You might remember Mike Kelly was at the Donald Trump rally that took place in October in Erie County, so whether or not that helped him remains to be seen, but he will win re-election. Scott Hutchinson winning another term in the state Senate, defeating Shelby Strohmeyer, the Democrat, 71-29. Dan Laughlin, the incumbent Republican, also winning another term in the state Senate. You heard Democratic Chairman Jim Wirtz yesterday saying it's difficult to defeat the power of incumbency. And he was referring to the Laughlin-Slomsky race. The Democrats thought they really did have a great candidate to challenge Laughlin. But again, sometimes there is that bias that the familiar is the comfortable. And we see there that Laughlin has won another term in the state Senate. Again, the race we just called, Ryan Bizzarro over Greg Hayes in the House District 3 race, so Bizzarro winning another term there. And Brad Rowan, our final election race here in the House District 6, defeats Matt Ferentz by a 65-35% margin. What has not been called yet is the presidential race. Here's the national vote. Joe Biden inching closer to 74 million votes, almost 70 million for the president. We are getting new numbers as we speak, so we'll bring that to you as soon as we get them. But for the last 10 minutes here, we're talking with Jeff Bloodsworth from Gannon University. Jeff, again, we thank you for taking the time. I feel like we've held you hostage here. But at this point, we could be here for hours more. This is our Erie News Now election live stream from the alert desk here. We've done this for the past few days. We did this on Election Day. Well, we're with you until we hear something tonight. We might leave you with a Joe Biden speech tonight. We might leave you with a Trump speech. We might leave you with a state call. We might leave you with some crazy legal challenge. We don't know. And that's the thing. We're trying to give you the most up-to-date information that we can with what we know, especially in the national race. And the national race, of course, right now, Jeff sees Joe Biden ahead. Let's just, for the people who didn't join us earlier, let's plan out the timeline right now. We know the former vice president is speaking tonight at some point. We don't know what time. We know that Pennsylvania and Georgia are close to having all the votes counted. We don't know if they'll be called. What do you foresee happening next? Is it a state call? Is it the speech by the former vice president? From your political expertise, what in your mind is the next step right now?
They are waiting to schedule the time of the speech to listen to what the states are going to say. And so one can imagine a scenario in which Pennsylvania says, look, we're not ready to call. And then, the former vice president is going to have a choice in whether he declares victory or he says, I'm going to kind of continue to wait until we hear a state that has been called. It's not just Pennsylvania. It's also Arizona and Nevada. But I would imagine they're waiting for Pennsylvania. And I think there's a decent likelihood that there's going to be a call in Pennsylvania. The former vice president is going to go out and declare victory. Look, this is everybody understands. You get every political advantage by declaring victory, and then the way you're depicted in the press as the president-elect or
Sure.
the governor-elect, and then it would be the opponent's job to disprove that. They're waiting to see what I think Pennsylvania is going to do, and it's anybody's guess. But the number of votes are every minute, every hour are becoming less. My understanding is that they predicted yesterday that they would be done by this evening, and so my assumption is that they're going to largely be done by tonight.
Couple questions for you, and these are hypothetical questions, but I think they matter at this point. For anyone watching any specific outlet, it doesn't matter what news outlet that is, whether it's us, a national outlet, again, we wait to predict until we know for sure what the results are. Does knowing the vice president's going to make a speech tonight, does that in all persuade or put pressure in your mind on the networks to make a call, knowing that there's going to be an announcement tonight from the former vice president?
Yes. That's why they announced
that was more simple than I thought. I thought that was going to be a more difficult
No, I mean, this is... Look, I mean, it's about gamesmanship. Yeah, and look, I mean, networks have no... This is not legally binding if they call a race, but this is why they announced it hours in advance. They're sending a signal to election officials in Pennsylvania, and they're sending a signal to networks, right? They're saying, hey, election officials, let's get this vote count done. I'm sure they had a sense of where the vote count was going to be. Now the networks have been put on notice that the former vice president is coming out. And so everyone's attention is being turned to Pennsylvania, and, you know, this is about pressure at this point, and this is what happens in every race.
Right.
This just happens to be the presidency during a pandemic, and, you know, the closest presidential election since 1976.
Right. Next question I have for you. We talked about that the vice president might be making a statement because he thinks the state's going to get called. What happens if it doesn't? Does he not speak?
Oh, no, he has to speak.
Okay.
He said he was going to.
Okay.
I mean, if you follow the vice president's campaign, what has been extraordinary is, you know, look, Joe Biden had a history of kind of being gaffe prone and, you know, actually telling people what he actually thought. Right. And he's been so disciplined in this presidential campaign. Thus, I strongly suspect that they have every indication. You know, and again, election officials are not giving the Biden campaign information they're not giving to the Trump campaign. So I strongly suspect that both campaigns have been told this is going to be the vote count at time X. Based upon that, you know, my assumption is that they know they strongly suspect it's going to be called. Or they have a plan that it's not going to be called, right? And they're still going to say something beyond what they've been saying, which has been nothing over the last few days.
So there could be two different speeches prepared, and it's just a matter of picking which one at the time that Joe Biden speaks.
This has been a very disciplined campaign. I imagine they are ready for more than one scenario. I suspect that they have a strong hunch of which scenario that they're dealing with. I honestly would be surprised if Joe Biden didn't come out tonight and essentially declare victory.
Right.
That could change. If we still have over 100,000 votes that have not been counted in Pennsylvania, then I don't think he declares victory. But if you can get the vote numbers down to a certain level and you get your lead to a certain level, right? And then I think at that point, you know, because they're trying to cast themselves as opposite of the president. And so if you're trying to do that, you want to be as quote-unquote responsible as possible. Not saying that it is responsible, but you're trying to kind of appear to be responsible, because I think they're trying to cast the president as being not responsible. I'm not taking a side on that, but I think that's the argument.
And the level of caution that we've seen during this election process, especially over the last 48 hours, is pretty incredible. So we know the state, when it's called, the networks will have a pretty fair degree of confidence that the race will be called. Before we go here, I do want to take a look at a tweet that I just came across my Twitter here, and this relates to the allegations made by the president that there is some fraud going on in the election. You take a look. This is a letter sent from the members of Congress, Michael Cloud specifically, and Andy Biggs. You can see Michael Cloud, a representative of Texas. This is sent to Attorney General William Barr, talking about, in essence, we can sum this up, saying that they believe there is voter irregularities, voter fraud when it comes to the election. You can see the congressman writing, quote, "The allegations of irregularities in the vote counting process should be concerning to everyone. I asked AG Barr to use the resources of the Justice Department to ensure that the process is conducted in a manner that is fully consistent with the state and federal law." Biggest thing I'm looking at here is who retweeted this. Representative Mike Kelly here of Pennsylvania, again, has always been a strong supporter of the president, but we can see here, again, we're not picking sides, we're just showing you what we're knowing here, and again, the representative seemingly in agreement with this letter sent to the Attorney General.
Yeah, look, I'm writing a biography of a former Speaker of the House, right? So I know a little bit, more than a little bit, about members of Congress and the history of the Congress. These are backbenchers. These are not particularly important members of Congress. This is not from Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. If you ever delve into the papers of members of Congress, there are literally hundreds of thousands of letters and memos that they crank out.
Sure.
It's pro forma. Look, they're Republicans. They should be asking the Attorney General to be on the lookout for corruption. It's allegations without any evidence. It's what's to be expected.
And we will see what happens here. Again, just information as we go. It's breaking. We give it to you as soon as we know it here on our air. Right now, we're going to let you go on our live stream because Erie News Now at 5 is starting right now here with Eva Mastromatteo and Mike Ruzzi. We'll be on the alert desk for a hit with that with Jeff Bloodsworth. But until then, everybody, join us back after our shows this evening for our live stream as we await the results of the presidential election. Take care.